welcome to Los Angeles Data Platform. Today we have a speaker, Michael Wall. He's going to be presenting on PolyBase. It's what's for dinner. Hopefully this is going to be about dinner or PolyBase. Michael, it's all yours.
Well, that was quick. All right. Let's make sure people can hear things.
Okay, I am hiding my share so you can share your screen.
Joseph, can you hear anything?
Steve, there's a complaint that someone can't hear.
Okay. For some reason, I'm not able to hear anything. Well, if three of us can hear, then that looks like something local. Interesting. How do I stop that video? Welcome to Teams.
Oh, we can hear someone preparing their food.
No, somebody. Okay, perfect.
Okay, here he's coming back in.
I'm still trying to figure out the perfect setting for the Teams meeting. How do I prevent people from sharing, but at the same time not preventing too much from sharing? So
yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one too. We're still working it out. Looks like we still got a few more people coming in.
yeah.
All right, well, let's do a quick, let's see, where'd my PowerPoint go? Joseph, can you hear us?
Perfect. Oh, I hear nothing.
Here's nothing.
Yeah, that looks like something local.
Yeah.
Is anyone else having sound issues, or is just Joseph?
Looks like he's...
It looks like this is something local.
Yeah, okay. I was just gonna say if share my screen. I know, Joseph, if you've tried looking at, you got to go to your device settings. So speaker set. So I would suggest you try that and take a look at that one. Again, go to the ellipse right here, device settings, and make sure that, because sometimes, one of the things I've noticed is that, for instance, like especially if you have a webcam, oftentimes webcams, like my webcam has speakers on it, and it'll default to that, so I don't want to do that. Anyway, well, thank you all for coming, and let's see if we can get this thing going. So we'll just start.
Well, just in case, this session is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. So for Joseph that has problems to hear, worst case scenario, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube channel of a developed platform.
So can they unmute their mics, or are you controlling that, or what? The reason
I'm guessing they control it themselves because I didn't do anything. Yelena was able to unmute herself and mute herself, so it's in their control.
I would love to hear from all of you right now before I start. If you could explain, maybe if you want to mention why you're interested in PolyBase. If anyone wants to speak about that.
My name is Travis Pritchett. I've been to a few of these. Steve's a great guy. I've met him a few times at the SQL Saturdays, and currently I work in terms of some data integration with a lot of different systems, and they have different databases and different things going on. And it seems like this might be better than linked servers and linked databases or anything like that. So I was kind of interested in seeing how to kind of bring, big pieces of data together, maybe in one environment.
Okay, and it definitely will. I mean, it's linked servers still have a place in this world, but PolyBase does some different things. So yeah, I mean, definitely, especially with large pieces of data. I'm using it right myself right now for a couple different customers, different versions of PolyBase, and then also Elastic Query, which is very similar. And it does exactly what it's supposed to do. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Johnny Yagapan.
Hi, Johnny.
Hi. I used to experiment a lot of this the PolyBase, it's kind of accessing multiple databases with the different set of source databases, right? Like big data, synopsis, Azure synopsis, or the real-time BI. All these are the areas that we'll be exploring, trying to find out which is the best thing to go with. Like, for example, like a cloud-based data warehouses like Snowflake, Databricks, Synopsys. Similarly, just I want to understand how the PolyBase is working.
Okay. Wow. It sounds like you've dealt with a lot of different things. You dealt with, and that's the main thing, though, is that again, just like what Travis was asking, I mean, you can use against all these different data sources. The problem is that there's different versions of PolyBase, and so you have to see how it works. One of my current challenges I'm dealing with is that there's a different version of PolyBase, for instance, that connects to Synapse as compared to other data sources, and so due to that, there's some different commands.
Sure, actually, yeah, I tried to set it up PolyBase, but I had really challenges accessing certain Hadoop-based data sources.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is where I was as far as the PolyBase is concerned.
Well, I hope that feel free to ask questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And of course, all of you can have my email address, and I'm happy to talk about it. In fact, let me show you. This is kind of neat. A fellow from, someone's got some crosstalk going on. See if I can find it. Where'd that go? There was a couple people who came to a, here we go. If you can see my screen or not. So a couple of people who came to my presentation at Past Summit on PolyBase, and they were so excited about that they wanted to have a place that we could talk about it. So we talked to Chrissy Lemaire, who maintains the SQL Saturday Slack. The SQL Server Slack, the community Slack, and she added our own PolyBase channel. So if you're interested in doing that, I mean, we haven't had any activity yet, but the whole point is that we're going to have this for discussion. So let me know if you're interested in that. And let me put, it's also
Yeah, sure, Michael.
Thank
Thank you for that. Yeah.
It's going to be on my slide, but anyway, here's my work email, so feel free to email me. Okay, it looks like Joseph is able to hear. Jonathan, can you hear or not? You still can't? Or okay, we're trying to find the phone number for Jonathan. Let's see. It seems like here's Steve right here. If you go to meeting detail, oh yeah, it doesn't have the phone number. Maybe if we go to, let's see. Yeah. Well, shoot, there's got to be a way to get that together.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't show the phone number directly. If I click on meeting options, it tells me that I'm not an organizer, which is funny, but
yeah, no, I'm trying to think of what we could do that. I guess he could call.
There's supposed to be a phone number.
I agree. Anyway, Jonathan, if you want to, I can just give you my. I guess I could put my phone number. I could put my phone on here, and I could just have it sitting next to me, and you'll be able to hear what I'm talking about. Trying to think. Well, no, that's not going to work either. Yeah, no, that would work. We could do that. It's a little weird, but sure. With all these technological solutions. Joseph, are you saying that the suggestion to Jonathan that he uses a web version? Okay. Jonathan, do you see that text, that message in the chat? Oh, you can't see anything. Right. Well, no, you can see that. You can see this. You can see my screen. Well, hopefully he's paying attention here. Okay, well, might as well get going. We can only do so much. For the people who just joined, you joined a little bit later. I was saying, feel free to unmute your mic if you. I'd love to hear from you right now before we get started. Why you're interested in PolyBase. So if you wanted, you feel free to do that. Well, I don't know what to tell you, Jonathan.
I'm looking for a number, and I'll post it once I find it.
All right. Well, let's get started then, I think. Oh, he left. Okay, well. Let's see if he's going to. Okay, well, anyway, let's just get started. So thank you, everyone, for showing up to this presentation. Yes, I did do this at past summit, which unfortunately may be the last summit, but we'll see how that all works out. I am a consultant, a DBA, work for a company called 3Cloud, which is a service provider. They specialize in doing Azure work, and they keep me pretty busy. Well, PASS is still around. Guys still talk about PASS. PASS is still a wonderful organization. There's been a lot of noise about what's been going on and worried about that, but still think everyone should try to support PASS, be a member, we'll see what happens. SQL Saturdays are probably some of the highlights of my, of the year when I get to go to SQL Saturdays, and I'm really sorry that I can't go to them in person, but virtual ones are still fun. Who am I? I've been a DBA for quite a long time. I originally started off as a Unix administrator, but after Y2K, I was responsible for administering all the Y2K, or coordinating all the Y2K patching of all the Unix boxes. And the DBA team lead came to me and said, "You want to be a DBA?" And I said, "Sure." So I didn't know any better what I was getting into. And so they sent me off to, so I mostly supported Oracle. And they sent me off to Oracle school right away. And I got there and I did not understand what SQL was. But luckily I had a pretty good knowledge of storage technology. So I was able to keep up and understand the storage parts of Oracle. But it took me a little while to come up to speed. So I mean, I had no idea of what select star from anything meant. Since then, I've learned a couple other database platforms. I've worked on lots of different OS platforms. I went through kind of a weird sort of different mindset last year. I thought that I wanted to become an Azure administrator, but I've realized now that I see Azure as just merely another OS rather than a, I mean, that's all it really is. It's just a different platform to do the same work. So it's just a matter of learning all the different unique twists of Azure, but I definitely support the Microsoft stack and I work on their products all day. I am on the leadership team for Oregon SQL, and I also have spent a lot of time and money traveling around to different local groups to do presentations live. Now we're doing virtual, so it's a little bit cheaper, but still the same sort of support. In fact, we just had a meeting this afternoon trying to get all the local people in the Willamette Valley up here working together. Huge on community. My next slide, why aren't you up here? So my usual piece is that I'll say is that I'm sure that if you're interested in speaking on anything, talk to Steve here, talk to Elena. We want you to be out there. Everyone has some sort of message to convey, and it's really important that you do that. So if there's some topic that you'd like to talk about, work with the group leaders, and they will help you come up with a 15, 30, 45 minute, 60-minute presentation about that topic. So I really encourage you to do it. I can't stress enough how much it's really improved my life. I made this decision about 3 or 4 years ago that I was going to get active, and as someone said, that I dove deep into the social media pool, and I started doing presentations, and I started promoting myself, and my life is much better. And I've met so many nice people along the way. Funny story, Steve and I were talking about first presentations, and I remember my first presentation was down in Eugene, Oregon, which was a good 180 miles away from where I lived. And I had my presentation all ready, but it depended upon network connectivity. And I went down there and I tested it out just right before I went into the room. But what I didn't realize was that there's a lot of concrete in the room where the presentation. So I get in there and nothing worked. And it's like I couldn't connect. And I'm going through my slides. And then finally I got to some that worked. And it's like, oh, here we go. We got something that works. But I still kept on going even after that disastrous first experience, and I'm still enjoying it. But let's talk about PolyBase a little bit. As you can see from my slides, so the Microsoft story for PolyBase is a little bit convoluted, like for most products. So the main reason that PolyBase has been given so much time is because big data clusters was coming along, and Microsoft has been thinking about big data clusters for quite a while. But back in the original time, they knew that they just needed to do something about big data. And this goes back quite a ways. It's evolved greatly since version 1, but it's also become more confusing. And to throw more confusion into the matter is the fact of Elastic Query, which is with the tool that you would use in Azure SQL Database. And I want to talk about that a little bit just because I've been personally dealing with Elastic Query right now. And I think it's interesting how it's very similar. The products are very similar, but there's a few differences in them as well. What doesn't help is that there's multiple versions too. So if you are running SQL Server 2016, 2017, you have what Bob Ward has called PolyBase version 1. Let me get my book. Steve and I were talking about this. So as I run away, because I can do that, I'm down here in my basement lair. But anyway, so this is the only known book right here that, let me shrink my screen right here. Hopefully everyone can read that. This is the only book that's out there on PolyBase by Kevin Fiesel. And then this is the book that I have and that Steve and I were talking about, which has a very good section on PolyBase. And Bob Ward is just a great speaker and good presenter, and he's very detailed and very technical in all of his descriptions. And so I would recommend both of these books if you're interested in learning about PolyBase.
Michael, are you sharing anything? We don't see the book. Or
you don't see it? I'm sharing my
No.
whole screen.
No, I see only the.
Michael is showing the book through his camera.
Yeah. Right. I'm sorry. Can you see me with my reindeer ears?
It is very small, tiny on the corner of the screen. I see.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Just trying to get it big enough. Can you see that? No. Anyway, let me just really simple. I will type it here in the chat right now. Or here, better yet, I have the power of the web in my hands.
By the way, there is already a question about PolyBase. Is PolyBase downward compatible, or do you need the exact version?
The exact version is not downwards compatible.
Meaning that PolyBase of 2019 would not work with PolyBase of 2017?
Meaning because there's different versions of the different features. That's a good question. I'm trying to think. So here we go. Let's see. Come on, just go. Can everyone see this? Big enough?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the SQL Server 2019 book, but it has a good chapter on PolyBase in it. And then here is the book by Kevin Fiesel on PolyBase. So let's see. Okay, so let me think about your question, Travis, for a second. And feel free to either ask questions or to type them in the chat. So it depends on what you're trying to do, I guess. So we're going to get into talking about PolyBase. The main thing we remember about PolyBase is that PolyBase is installed on the SQL Server instance. And one of the things is that each one is independent. So is it compatible? Travis, do you want to even talk and maybe go into a little more detail on your question?
Yeah, so for example, like if you have SQL Server, whatever version it is, like say if it's 20, even 17 or 16 or whatever, everything behind it will work, even up to like 2008 or whatever. I mean, unless you're doing something like really interesting, it's pretty compatible. So right. What I'm trying to get at is like if you know, you're dealing with versioning and you know, you upgrade to something and then you get screwed. So that's the basis of my question.
You're going to get screwed because it's more of, think of, instead of downwards compatible, think about capabilities. We're going to go into the details about the different versions, but in a nutshell, PolyBase version 1, which is what you see on SQL Server 2016-17, is really only compatible with Azure Data Lake and Hadoop. SQL Server 2019, which has so-called dubbed PolyBase version 2 by Bob Ward, is the one that where they really make it magical, and they open it up, and it allows to connect to lots of different data sources, and also you have an ODBC plugin, so you can connect to anything. So that's, do you see what I'm saying? It's not so much about downward compatibility, it's just about having additional features. So there's no reason in your environment you could have, sure, you could have a SQL Server 2017 instance that you could use to connect to just Hadoop, and it would work just fine, but you could then use a SQL Server 2019 instance that could also connect to Hadoop, but then it could connect to more stuff. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I was just kind of seeing if you had it all set up in 2017 and then you, you know, upgraded to, well, I guess it's not good to just upgrade, but you'd probably start from scratch anyway. But that was just trying to see how flexible that is, because at least on the Microsoft side, I've never run into a situation. I'm not like a, you know, full-fledged pro, but I haven't really run into a situation where if you go to like newer versions, you can still see the old stuff. So I was just kind of seeing if that was similar with the PolyBase or not.
Honestly, I just haven't tried to do that. I have done all my, I did some testing on PolyBase, the original version of PolyBase, and I've not actually tried to set up a kind of a mixed version. Since that's a good question, that would be kind of fun to do. So let me write that down as a note. I'm not going to say when I'm going to get to that, because I got lots of other interesting things to do too. But
does PolyBase connect to Delta Lake by any chance?
yeah, it does.
Okay, I tried actually the Delta Lake that works with the Python 3.2.7. And when we try to use that Python, right, it is using the Python drivers to access this Delta Lake, but the version what here the PolyBase is supported was kind of 2.7. So we had challenges accessing the Delta Lake from PolyBase.
Now, what version of Poly? I mean, it should, both versions of PolyBase should work with
Yeah,
data lake.
2019 I was trying. I think.
So that may be a specific case. I'm not sure. It's supposed to be able to connect. Did you first establish connectivity with data lake just as making an external data source?
No, actually it is a kind of Delta Lake. It's in the same server. You have a kind of running on the kind of with the Docker containers. From the Docker container, the Delta Lake will be on the Docker container, but from the SQL Server will be accessing that remote.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to laugh. It sounds like you just created yourself a really complicated situation. So
yeah,
theoretically it should, but I don't know how. I don't know what PolyBase thinks about Docker. I mean, it shouldn't have a problem as long as you give it a valid IP address. I mean, it's
exactly, yes. It should connect, like, as long as
it should work just fine. So no, as far as I know, there are no limitations of connecting to data lake with either version of PolyBase.
Sure.
It just sounds like you have a lot of extra variables in there that I can't.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll just say this is how I like to do my presentations. I prefer to have lots of people interested in talking about it. I don't like to do the canned presentations. If you want canned presentations, I can send you the link to my past presentation. But we're going to get the same thing. So feel free to ask questions or type in messages. But as we were just talking about, this was a good lead into the fact that, well, we have different versions of PolyBase, which doesn't make it easy to understand. But back in the original days, when this is a Microsoft slide where you can see where they were thinking about PolyBase way back when. This is dated 2011, I think it was, because you can see they were talking about SQL Server 2012. And you know, right then they knew that big data was obviously a reality there. They're talking about IoT stuff right here. And then you still had your ETLs. And you had the ways that you want to display your data, whether you want to use it through analysis services or reporting services. And this is talking about parallel data warehouse, which then became into, I'm trying to remember the evolution. But the point is that they knew that there's going to be a lot of data and there had to be a way to use that data. And so in the original vision is, I mean, at that point, Hadoop was really the only name in the game for big data. But they wanted it to be used using regular SQL because everyone knew how to use T-SQL. So they wanted to have that simple query. They wanted to have the scalability. They wanted to have the flexibility and the integration. So talking about scalability, which is where you'll see some of the features, especially in PolyBase version 2, where we're going to go into great detail talking about the scale out nodes. The flexibility allowing for different Hadoop versions. And then finally, integration. The idea is that you had the idea, you could use it as data sources. I mean, Power BI revolutionized self-service data by the you could just reach out and talk to almost any data source. And so PolyBase gives you that similar sort of capability. David DeWitt, who is the Microsoft technical fellow who was the original inspiration behind this, and I just read this quote, even though I know you can read my screen just anyway. PolyBase only works within Parallel Data Warehouse for now, but it might be later added to SQL Server. It relies on the data movement service in Parallel Data Warehouse, and DMS does not exist in SQL Server. So this is very true. And that was one of the things that they had to do which they had to add that into SQL Server. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the stage was set for PolyBase and really for big data clusters back in 2011, but the technology wasn't there, the drive wasn't there, and really the end product wasn't there yet either, which is big data clusters. So here's the evolution. These are the names I couldn't remember. So Parallel Data Warehouse had to become Analytics Platform System, which finally became Azure SQL Data Warehouse in the cloud, which is now called Azure Synapse, which is something that I get to deal with on a regular basis and is not very much fun. But anyway, it works. And when they put out SQL Server 2016, they did put PolyBase into it, but the limitations were very glaringly obvious, which is the fact that you only had Hadoop and Data Lake version 1 and blob storage. They all worked just fine, but there wasn't any real burning reason for anyone to use it. It was more of kind of like an interesting sort of concept. Link servers were still a lot more effective. And the truth is people were still so used to using ETLs that why bother? I mean, it seemed like it was so limited in the data source you could connect to that there was really no point to worry about learning about it. But it still met all of the requirements that had been envisioned originally for PolyBase. So right here, query data stored in Hadoop and using T-SQL. Again, using a common, using a common language that people knew how to use. The fact that you could query offline storage. So again, it was realizing that capability. You could import and export data. And then finally, using the MapReduce technology in Hadoop allowed you to scale out and use distributed computing in order to essentially let Hadoop doing all the work for you. So when you're doing a query, it goes over to the MapReduce essentially, and it'll scale up as needed. But it just still wasn't very popular. It was the first time doing it, and it didn't work. But data was getting more. There's more data. I mean, who is it? He's down there with Ami Levin, who did a great presentation at SQL Saturday Sacramento on big data, and he's right. I mean, it's big data is just data that's big. But the point is that more and more data is coming through. I mean, when you look at all these different companies with all their data needs, it's huge. One of my customers that I got to work with, I was really just looking with talking to them, but they are one of the single biggest users of Azure space right now, and they are generating a petabyte of data per month, a petabyte of data that they're uploading every single month into Azure. It's insane the amount of data that they have. And they're not the biggest customer, but they are one of the bigger ones. So big data clusters came out. And look right here, you can see we're talking about this term that Bob Ward also mentions in his book. And he and another fellow coined it, but the whole idea of data virtualization. Because what you're doing is that you're virtualizing your data. So there's no need to use ETLs to actually move the data anymore. the fact is that you can just see the data in all these different sources. So right here, you can talk about, you have different, relational databases, Hadoop, you have NoSQL. The point is that you can grab the data, and you can virtualize it, not just visualize it, because that's what Power BI does. This is virtualizing the data and make it available to do whatever you need to do for it. Any questions? All right. Here's something there. Okay. Anyway, so, and the other neat thing about PolyBase and the version 2 in SQL Server 2019 is all of a sudden they wrote all these connectors. So it has built-in connectors to go to Oracle and Teradata, MongoDB, Cosmos DB, and of course SQL Server, which is really the big one. And then also ODBC connectors to cover all the missing gaps. So Microsoft realized that they had to make the product more conventionally appealing. One of the things is that is kind of interesting how there's one of the things I said in my presentation is that this kind of gives DBAs back their power, because for quite a while the ETLs have been moving data all over the place, and the analytics people and the reporting people are the ones who really are the ones who are, their skills are really shining. But all of a sudden, you need to move the data back into SQL Server because you can use it as the hub for all of your data. So when we go back again, like I said, so they took this and they prettied up PolyBase and they made it so that it was actually really useful. And again, this is all going towards big data clusters. But right here, once again, the idea of data virtualization and showing all of these different ones. So Microsoft is not so much worried about selling SQL Server anymore, even though that's very important. What Microsoft wants to do is that they want SQL Server to become the hub, the data hub for the rest of the data world. So they don't care if your data is in Oracle, they don't care if your data is in Cosmos DB or in any other data source. The idea is that what they want to do is they want to make it easy for you to have your SQL Server instance on-prem or in Azure, of course, because they make lots of money in Azure. And then you can use PolyBase to create your external tables to your data sources anywhere around the globe. And then you can let your report people see that data and they can do their queries and they can do their reports, or your analysis people, whatever. The point is that all of a sudden SQL Server just became really relevant again. It's that, like I said, the data hub. Another great quote, which I'll read out loud for you, even though I know you can read it. As part of the overall strategy for SQL Server 2019 to implement a solution for data virtualization, our hope and promise is that SQL Server is an excellent center for data virtualization. In other words, SQL Server 2019 can become the data hub for your organization. Once again, it's in that SQL Server 2019 Revealed book. Very good book to read. But the point is, like I said, DBAs can get back their power. Is that you are now, once again, responsible for making sure that not only is the SQL Server instance running, but then you're also responsible for understanding the data for all these other data sources. You make the connectors via the external tables, and then you can empower your users to do the queries against these tables. Because I mean, think about it. I mean, I've never done I've done some ETL work, but how much time, for instance, like let's think in like some sort of a business or something like that. So maybe you have a couple different systems, because a lot of businesses do. They don't usually have a single system. They have they'll have multiple different systems, like maybe one for GL and one for AR and one for AP. And a lot of time is spent copying data from those different databases and maybe putting them into a single reporting database or a single source of truth, which then reporting is done. So instead of having to take the time and the network resources in order to copy that data, why not just virtualize that data on your SQL Server instance? And then you give those people the ability to do the queries against that data. the distributed computing. So that's one of the other main features that came out in PolyBase version 2, which is on SQL Server 2019, is that you have the scale out nodes. So you can install PolyBase on every single SQL Server 2019 node, server that you want to, and they can work together. And if they're not available, it'll keep on working just fine. But the main thing here is that it allows you to scale up and down as needed. And PolyBase is smart enough to know when it needs to do that. And then finally, once again, you're using T-SQL, a well-known language is you can do your queries against. And look at here, yet another Microsoft picture, but what's in the middle here? SQL Server 2019. That's not an accident. They want you to use it again as that data hub. Here, right here, hopefully everyone can see this. This is the only known comparison chart. Kevin Fiesel wrote this for his PolyBase book, but I think it's really telling to see what are the features that you have and you don't have in the different. Now it's a little bit outdated because it should say Azure Synapse here, but notice how these are all the things that you can't do in SQL Server 2017, but they've added a few more features here in 2019, but yet you can do, for instance, you can do create table on select in the Synapse version of PolyBase. So anyway, it would be wonderful if they could unify all the versions, but that's not happening yet. It does work on Linux, but it doesn't support scale out nodes. And I think why bother if you can't do that? I mean, you want that distributed computing capability. So I don't know if any of you have installed PolyBase yet, and we're not going to go through step by step, but there's a couple of important points I wanted to make about PolyBase. So first of all, when you're doing the installation, you might as well go ahead and pick the Java connector because you need that in case you run into any Hadoop. If you don't, then you have to go through and do the install again. I would recommend that you choose the scale out group option. Again, otherwise you would have to go back and you would have to change it again. This just allows, it means that if you have more than one PolyBase instance in your enterprise, that you can use the nodes together. Again, recommend that you go ahead and do the Java installation so you can talk to Hadoop. And then one of the really important ones is that you can't use SQL accounts. You have to use an AD account for PolyBase. Recommend that you use a separate account for PolyBase. And here are my test accounts. So there's only two services you need to worry about. You have the engine and you have the data movement service. So again, recommend that you use, instead of an AD, I mean, you have to have an AD account. Recommend you set up a separate one for PolyBase. But let's talk about the concepts. So right here in PolyBase, so this is the key to everything here is the external data stores. So as you can see right here, and this is the SQL code. So whoops. What you're doing is that the first thing you have to do is you have to create that external data source. So this is the fairly well-known New York taxi data, which happens to be in Hadoop. As you can see here, so I've created an external data source, which then has a name. And this name is what you use in order to create your external tables. So you tell PolyBase what the type is, and then here's the location. So here's the URL that points to this data right here. Now with Hadoop, it's a little bit different because, or in this case, this is going to be, you have to worry about the file format. So in this case, you have to tell it what the format is, show the options and such like that. But then after you've created that, so again, remember how I pointed out the data source right here. So here's the name, the NYT public. And you can see here, so then we create the external table with the data source. Now again, since this is Hadoop, we have to put in the file format. But in that, it's just creating a table. So imagine, so this is a spreadsheet that is hidden in Hadoop. And you visualize that spreadsheet right here, or think about it. So you've got a spreadsheet, you have multiple columns in your spreadsheet. So what this has done is it has taken the ability to point to that spreadsheet and you've now made a table that you can join, you can do queries against. I mean, you can do it. Now you can't do inserts, you can't do updates. I mean, this is it's a one-way street. This is read only. Even though actually I think in Hadoop you can do inserts, but we're not going to get into that. But the point is that you all of a sudden have access to this data. So this is data that may have been shoved off in cold storage someplace in data lake, wherever, and all of a sudden that data is accessible. So instead of having to worry about taking the time to find the data, find the spreadsheet, pulling it out, copying it over, put it in someplace where your users can access it, instead you just create an external table and you say, boom, here you go. And as you can see here, in a SQL Server instance, you can see the actual, this is how it shows up as the external tables. The only difference is that you do, it's highly recommended that you go and put some sort of an external, some sort of a qualifier just so you know that it's separate. And that's one of the limitations of PolyBase, and there are a few, is that it can't be the same name as the table in the source. So if the table was called date on the source data, you can't call it date here. You have to call it a different name. PolyBase won't allow you to do the same name. So then if we go back to, and I can pull up, no. That would have been bad. Let's see, is my Zoom it working? So if we go right here to the databases, oops. So I know you can't see this yet. Don't worry, I'm going to zoom it up. Yeah, this isn't really all that very exciting yet, but anyway. So here, again, here's that same external data source right here. So you can see that I'm got it, and I'm not very proficient with Zoom, and I'll be upfront about that one. I've not practiced with enough. But either way, you can see the data source location right here. So this exists as a data source. And then we have in here, since this is Hadoop, we have to have.
Is it running on some HD inside the Hadoop version, Michael?
I'm sorry, what?
The Hadoop, is it running on a HD inside or it is local?
No, it's over. I don't know where it is. Actually, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
That URL is. It's somewhere. It's just a public data source.
Okay, so that looks like a HD inside or something.
It looks like it's what?
HD inside, Azure HD inside.
Oh, well, it could be. It is actually.
Okay.
I think it's a data lake.
Okay.
It is actually a data lake, is what it is.
Yeah, the VASP is for HD inside. They use for Hadoop and HD inside.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
you.
I just don't. I'm not a Hadoop person. I just know that. I know this is a valid data source and it works. Sorry. Anyway, so here we go. As you can see right here, like I said, how we have the external tables. So those were all created. I just go ahead and create the tables, and they're just pointing to the to that, and then what I can do is I can expand them. As you can see here, these are the columns in the actual table. So again, you're virtualizing the data. This is reaching out to wherever the data source is, and I can do a select on that data right now. So let me do that.
Hey, Michael, could you increase the font size?
I'm sorry, what?
The font size?
Yeah, I was going to zoom it up, but let me see if I can do the font size bigger too.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was just going to show you the results, and I was going to zoom into it, but let me see if I can. Let's see, how do we change?
You can press the control
There
button.
we go. Okay, here we go.
Oh.
Can you see that?
Yeah, it's much clear. Yeah, much better. Thank you.
No, I know I know it's a problem, but especially that's one of the biggest problems of these virtual presentations is that it's a little more challenging. Well, and hopefully this won't take that long, but anyway, the point is that this may take a little while to run, but the point is that it's actually going out there to this data source and it's doing a query and it's doing a count from that table. So everyone understands, kind of get a little bit of the idea about the whole virtualization then.
Is this data like stored in the like copied to the database? The data in the table, or it's just like the table is the query is table is just a view sort of representation?
Yeah, it's kind of like a view. It's a pointer is what it is. Okay, well, it looks like that I apparently have some problem with that, but the point is, oh, it just timed out. That's fine, and I didn't. Anyway, I was working too much. It should work, but the point is that it's just a pointer to that data source, and that's all it is. There's a lot of internal stuff that we're not allowed to see. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Is it fair, Michael, is it fair to say that PolyBase is like open query with link server, but you have more data sources that you can access?
Yeah, we're going to talk some about the limitations and the differences between link server. I mean, one thing about link server is, so PolyBase allows you to really dial in the rights because you can give the rights. You choose the database. While link server, you have to give access. You're giving access to the instance, while PolyBase is down by the database. I mean, of course, in link server, you can do the same thing because you can create a SQL Server account, a SQL user account that you can grant to each one of the databases on the instance, and so you can restrict the rights that way as well if you want to. As far as open query, I'm trying to think about the limitations of open query. I mean, the problem with open query, of course, is you still have to do that 4-part naming convention. While here, you wouldn't have to do that. So it's just going to be, as long as you have access to the server and to the database, you can just do a query against that table.
The reason why I'm bringing up open query with PolyBase is because what I read from Bob's workbook, the PolyBase also pushing the whole execution to the target. And
Yes.
open query does the same thing. So if you, let's say, have 1,000,000 rows and you want to do where clause, you can do it and you can force the target to do all the job and just come back with all rows being filtered. Much like open query, PolyBase does here the same thing.
Oh, I see. So when you say the target, you mean, so not the source, you're talking about the target, the fact that.
Let's say that you're sourcing 1,000,000 rows from Oracle. So in open query, you don't want 1,000,000 rows. You want, let's say, just filtered for California, and you're gonna get 50 rows. So you instructing Oracle, okay, give me records and also put a filter on the state of California, and that would give you 50 rows back. So you don't have to get 1,000,000 and then filter that after. And I think the PolyBase, it does the same thing.
It does do the same thing, and that's one of the advantages of it. So that's actually a good lead in I was going to think about. So my current quandary is that we're dealing with issues. I've got, for one of my customers, we've got a construct where we are using Azure SQL Database as a way to virtualize the data that's in an Azure Synapse data warehouse. And it has to do with the nature of their source, their application that they use, which is in COBOL. We have to do it this way for a reason. and it's a limitation. And so one of the things we've noticed that, so Azure SQL Database actually uses Elastic Query instead of PolyBase, which is similar, but it's not quite the same. And one of the problems is that when I look at the execution plan, it's ridiculous because I think I even have it right here. Maybe. Oh well, it's not important. But anyway, the point is that I'm going against 2 billion row tables, or 2 to 6 billion row tables, big tables. And when I do the query, when I do the execution plan, all it's doing is it's pulling, instead of doing any filtering whatsoever, it's just pulling all 2 billion rows from the table, and then it does the filter as it pulls them. So there's no filtering whatsoever on the source. It's just like boom. So long-winded answer to yes, PolyBase does that a lot better. And the other advantage is that PolyBase also will use the TempDB on the destination server, so it'll also help out in doing the additional filtering. So, what?
Where's the Bluetooth headset, the red one that I use for rowing?
Sorry, my son just came. I'm doing a presentation. It's upstairs in my room on top of the Kindle.
That looks like a CNN with kids running into a room.
Except he's almost 18, but anyway, he's still. He wants, well, that's good if he wants to do rowing. I hope he does get some exercise. He was asking where the wireless headphones were. Anyway, so we were talking about PolyBase is that I think, yeah, first of all, Steve, I believe you're the one who asked the question. So first of all, yeah, so it's like that where it's forcing the source to do a lot of the work, and then, but also SQL Server is doing the work as well. One of the things about PolyBase is that you can actually put statistics on the external tables as well. So you can add that, you have that advantage. You can't do indexing on, but you can do statistics. And of course, you can do indexing on the source tables too. So that kind of, I mean, you know, what you're looking at, I mean, you know, you weren't really asking a question, you were just merely stating the fact, but you're right.
Right, but you gave me more info. Yes, you mentioned the MDB and the statistics, yes. So it's much more advanced than OpenQuery.
Yeah, I wish.
Oh, and of course, you don't have to know PL SQL.
Right.
Like you have to do in OpenQuery.
I was going to see. Let me see if I can find this because it was it wasn't really that exciting a picture, but it was important nonetheless. Is when we were doing. We've had. I had a picture. Well, that's fine. I shouldn't anyway. Customer stuff, but the point is that when I look at the execution plan, it was just obviously that there was nothing being done on the source server whatsoever through Elastic Query. So on this customer, we're actually talking about the idea of going to installing instead of using Azure SQL Database, is actually installing doing a VM and putting SQL Server 2019 on it, so we can do proper PolyBase install, and then do the same exact concept where we'll do an external table from Azure Synapse, and then see what the performance is like. Because right now we're having some bad performance issues in pulling the data through Azure SQL Database. And it's not for lack of power. I mean, I've got that Azure SQL Database cranked up to 32 vCores, and it's got tons of RAM on it, but it's still, we're having horrible issues with latency. But, so part of what we're talking about here is, again, using, so one of the advantages of going to PolyBase version 2, which is on SQL Server 2019, is that you can connect to SQL Server. Very similar, except in this case, you have to create a master key and you have some scoped credentials. And then the other thing is that you don't have to worry about a file format like you do with CSVs. So it's just merely an external data source. So right here you can see where it's just merely pointing to the SQL Server name and pushing through the credentials. So if we go back to right here, I can't make this any bigger. Now, can you make you can't make the font on the left side bigger, can you? Or you probably can, it's just a setting. What was I looking for? All right, here we go. So see, as much as I said on the other one is that the right here. So this one is just pointing to, now this does happen to be a local database. It's in my little cluster I have right here. But again, this is just pointing to another SQL Server. It's an external data source. And this one, I probably could do a query against if I can figure out how to do that. So again, right here, you can see here, once again, we have the external tables. So in this case, this is just pointing to, again, a table. This is a database on another server, but it still has got these external tables. So if I were to do let's see if this works a little bit better. If this times out, then we've got some real problems. It means my internal cluster isn't working. One of the things I've noticed about PolyBase, though, is that it's still, yeah, maybe it should be faster, and I'm not quite sure what that is. So one of the things that I'll point out a couple times is I've noticed that it makes a big difference about what version. Essentially, make sure that your SQL Server instance is patched up. You want to use the most recent CU because Microsoft is constantly shoving out improvements on PolyBase right now. So I know that back when I first set up this cluster, I think we were on SQL Server 2019 CU4. And when I went from CU4 to CU5, so I've obviously got some problems here with my network. I apologize. I obviously didn't get things. It should be working. Could be that the cluster isn't working right. So let's do a little bit of this is probably going to time out, which is okay. So one of the problems in dealing with the scale out nodes is the fact that if they're not working right, they cause some problems. And that was one of the things that we're going to go through here. And it was also in my demonstration is showing how the scale out nodes work. So we'll get to that. Let's go through a little bit more of the presentation. So the point though is that the cluster, so you can use SQL Server to make a external data source as well. Same sort of concept. So right here, you create an external table and you have your data source, and then you have a table that ideally, except in my world, is you can select against it. And as we just look right there, you can see where you can see them in your SSMS, you see them as external tables. As I said, these are pointers, so there's not actually any data in them. You can expand them in SSMS. You can see the columns in them. You can see the data types of the columns, but you can't actually see the data in there. But you can still do a query against them, and you can see the data. I always use the term pivot point or pass through. So again, you're virtualizing the data. The point is that you don't have to copy the data over locally anymore. Ideally, you can just go and see the data. And as we were just talking about, so PolyBase is smart, is that it's going to offload the work whenever it's possible. So the push down predicate is something that's tied only to Hadoop, I think it is, but it's still, you'll either push it to external data source or also use its own optimizer to make it. You'll use the SQL Server optimizer to make sure that it is efficient as possible. So we've been trying to use some joins, so maybe we'll get the cluster working here. Well, we'll go through the cluster thing. Let's go in the cluster a little bit. It's important. I'm going to skip around a little bit just so you can see what we're doing here. And then we can go back and talk about the demos a little bit more. So the main thing here is that what this is that this is a 3-node cluster. And so I've got where's my query right here? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. Eleni was there for she saw this whole painful presentation, this demo right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell PolyBase, the SQL Server, that PolyBase needs to be run on each one of them. So we have 3 different nodes, and we have AG1, AG2, and AG3. So the scale out node concept is that you have a head and then you have compute nodes. And in order for the scale out nodes to work, you have to tell which one's going to be the head. So you have your master and your slave sort of relationship. So right here on my AG1 node, I just told it that is what's going on. So now I'm going to do it here on 3. And now I'm going to do it here, whoops, on 2. So what I just did was, again, I told that, but now here comes the painful part. So I am going to show you on one of these servers, and then I'll zoom up, but essentially what you have to do is, so right here, so these are the 2 key services. You have the engine and you have the data movement service. So in a scale out node environment, again, to go back to the basic point, is if you choose not to do this, you can just have a single node, and so then you don't have to worry about this quite as much. But if you have a multi-node instance, which you want to do if you can because of the performance, and please don't take my demo as a reason not to use PolyBase. My point here is to make DBAs and administrators aware of some of the limitations that when you install it, that you have to realize that if you're moving around different nodes, that you have to do a lot of manual labor at this point. Now, you can do all this in PowerShell, and I'm more than happy to give you the commands in PowerShell, but it still ultimately gets down to manually stopping and starting services. So when you're doing this, so I'm going to zoom it, but pretty much what I'm going to do here is those 2 services I just showed you is that I'm going to restart them. And while we're doing this, while I'm waiting for that one to get going, I'm going to do the exact same thing here. Is I'm going to restart. So this is, okay. So in this one right here, so this is one of the nodes that should be, this is one of the slave nodes. So in this case, what you want to have is that you don't want to have the engine running, but you want to have the data movement service, because that's the one that talks to the different nodes. And then finally, we're going to go back to 3. Oops, come on, there we go. And on this one right here, I'm going to
Michael, can you explain one more time the difference between the engine and the data movement, please?
Yes, of course. So the easiest way is to think of is that the engine is the head node. That's the one that's in charge. And then the data movement is the part that directs all the traffic between all the different nodes in your cluster.
Oh, so data movement is for the scale out?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
So I didn't zoom in, I mean, because this is going to be the same picture in all of them. So we're going to go back to one and see if one is talking to me again. So what we've got here is, and then the other real kind of annoyance about it is that, oh, I see what's going on here. Okay. So this is where I actually talked to the head of the big data section in Microsoft, and I told him I think this is wrong. But what it does is that the stored procedure automatically disables the service, which I believe is wrong. I think it should be automated. But right now, so even though the service is running, and I restarted it, so I'm going to have to go here. I'm going to manually, or I can leave it on manual. It doesn't matter. I'm going to restart it. And then I'm going to start the data movement service. All right, so now we're going to zoom in again so you can see this. So as you can see, so this is what, ideally, this is what you're going to see for the head node. So in this case, you have the engine running and you have the data movement service. So this is the head node. This is AG1. And then if we go to AG2, so I'm going to do a quick refresh. So see, and then it gets confused. I'm going to start it up again. So here, this one this is one of the slave nodes. So this one, the engine is not turned on. And then I'm going to check this again. And it's just not behaving tonight. See, this is one of those like bad demo things. So anyway, let's see if this works. Go back to right here. And where's my sheet, the query?
Quick question.
Sure, go ahead. Ask questions.
Then you're using PowerBase scale out. Would other SQL servers need to have the same 2019, same CU, same edition?
No, they don't have to have the same CU. I would recommend it, though, that you would keep them synced up.
What about obviously SQL Server 2019, all of them?
Yes, all of them have to. You can't scale nodes don't work on the earlier version of PolyBase. You have to have it on the version 2 on the SQL Server 2019.
Okay, what about standard edition or enterprise?
It's on both. There's no limitation on that. It's not an enterprise feature. It's
so the scale out, the other server could be standard edition.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So as you see here, so this is kind of the crux of this is really what it gets down to is the confusion here. So this little query right here, I'll see, wait a minute. Let's see if we can I, good Lord. So right here in this, can everyone see this right here? Is that big enough?
Yes.
So
yeah,
right
we can.
here, so this is my fundamental problem with what Microsoft has given us. So right here, so I've been clear about saying that I feel that, so right here, AG1 is supposed to be the head node. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this scale out node. If you'll do the performance, you'll do the processing, there's nothing wrong with it. But there's something wrong with this DMV right here. this one right here, this is DMXX compute nodes. So it should say that the head node is 1 and the other ones are compute nodes, but for some reason it's not working that way. So now what's funny is if I go to SSMS, which normally, good DBAs would trust the DMVs over SSMS. If I refresh right here, so now I'm going to pull up my zoom it right here. And look at this. So right here on SSMS, if you see where it says scale out group. See right there where it says AG1 is the head and AG3 is the compute. And it says right here for AG2, AG1 is the head, AG2 is compute. And then for down here on AG1. So do you kind of understand what the point I'm trying to make here is that the scale out nodes, these groups work. They're a little bit awkward to administer, and this demonstration is purposely supposed to show you how painful it can be if things go on. Because what I did in my recorded presentation for PASS is I actually I powered off one of the nodes in here, and then went through the exact same process that you watched me do, which is where I had to go through and I had to disable and enable services. I had to restart services in order to get them working. The thing is that I just wanted you to be aware that if you set up your environment with PolyBase and you're doing scale out nodes, that if you had some sort of an HA issue, that PolyBase unfortunately is not HA aware. But it will work in that sort of environment. So even though this is a cluster, I'm sorry, I'm gonna get some more water. Let me see, of course. I'm going to take off my antlers because I keep on hitting them. So PolyBase is not an HA. It's not HA-able, and the fact is that when you look at the different here, let's see, we gotta expand the databases. So PolyBase puts on these 3 databases right here when you install it. Right here, so you see you have your DW configuration, diagnostics, and queue. And that's really the beauty of the way that's designed, because they designed it on purpose this way so that it would be able to handle the scale out nodes. So that way, if a node's all by itself, it's like, great, I can work. I don't care if I have my friends with me. If I have friends, then we're going to talk to each other using the data movement service. Again, the engine service is the one that says who's the head node. And then it uses the data movement service in order to talk among the individual nodes. And as far as I know, there's no actual limit to how many nodes you can have in the scale out group. So you could have 20 or 30 or 40 if you wanted to, if you had that many instances. And they would just automatically take the work that would come in, and it would reach out to all of its friends. And so, like, let's say, here on my AG3 server, it does a query against a huge database, a huge table. And then while it's processing, it reaches out to the other nodes in the scale out group and says, hey, I need help. And so then it would do that. It would distribute the load. So I just turned my whole presentation upside down. But anyway, it was apropos for it to go through that part of the demonstration. Here are the PowerShell commands right here, and I can just send. I can just go ahead and send the. I can send this little cheat sheet too if you want to. So hopefully you're all still with me on all this part. Like I said, we went a bit of a detour. So now this picture may actually make more sense now that I've gone through this, or it won't. But as you can see right here in this architecture drawing for PolyBase, you've got here, and here you've got your the three DW data warehouses, and then you have the engine and the data movement service. So right here is that the point that they're leaving out is that or rather they are seeing it. So right here it identifies you have your head node, and then you have your compute node and your compute node. So in this case, right here, the compute node, see how it's grayed out? meaning that they're not active. So here you have, this is your head node. The engine one is blue, which means it's live, and you can see data, the little lines, whoops. You can see the lines going from the DMS service, the DMS, to each one of those, and then it's talking right here. And one of the reasons they put tempdb on here is to point out the fact that SQL Server will absolutely be using tempdb in order to improve performance. So we went through the whole, you saw the services, the cluster, so you know that, and again, we have the 3 databases on each node. Like I said, it's not HA-able, but it will definitely operate in an always-on AG environment. So if I were setting this up for production, and I've only done it for a couple times, what I would do is I would definitely use the PowerShell script. So as you know, in always on and awesome Windows failover clusters, that you have the opportunity to put in additional scripts for what you need for your environment in order to deal with different situations. So if I were to set up that, I would put PowerShell into place, and I would put it like, if this node dies, if we fail over to another node in the cluster, then I would run these scripts, which would go through and they would make sure that the engine service on the non-primary node was disabled, and I would restart the services, both the 2 services, to make sure, and restart the services to all the nodes in the scale out group to make sure that PolyBase understood who was in charge and who were the slaves. Does that all kind of make sense? Anyone? Okay. All right, Joseph, thank you.
No, it does helpful, Michael.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure. I just said a whole lot of stuff there, and I showed you a painful demo, which again is painful on purpose. I come from a sysadmin background anyway, so I mean, that's, this is the sort of stuff that I have to do. So versus link servers.
Sounds like you enjoying it.
Yeah,
to make it painful.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe in, I like to get down to the nth degree. I like to make sure that when I say something it's accurate, and that's, I mean, I'm embarrassed if I make mistakes. So anyway, I try to do a good job. Not always successful. But anyway, so we did talk about a little bit, link servers. And so people have posited the idea that PolyBase is a replacement for link servers. It's not, it's a difference. Main thing is that it's using ODBC as compared to OLDB. Again, PolyBase is read-only. Link servers allow you to read-write, which is both useful and dangerous at the same time. Database scope versus instance scope, security implications. I think that, my last job, I had to set up link servers for the developers, and I thought it was a bad idea, but you can see where link servers can be useful. But one of the problems is making sure that they didn't have access to all the databases on the servers. The always on, so PolyBase works just fine with always on and clustering. I mean, you don't really have to do a whole lot, even though I did point out the fact that you would want to put those extra scripts in. Link servers, if you've ever had to set them up in a Windows failover cluster, are painful. And it's not something I would recommend doing if you have to, and they definitely don't work very well with always on. And then the main thing is that the scaled out execution. Link servers are a single threaded execution. They always have been. It's an old technology. Link servers came back from, I think, SQL 2000. While PolyBase is going to use the scale out, and I have a couple pictures I can show you. So another limitation of PolyBase is the fact that there's not a whole lot of logging, but you definitely can go into the diagnostic database and you'll learn how to use logging. If anyone here has ever worked with SSRS, you are probably very well aware of the limitation of the logins in the SSRS database as well. So right here, can everyone see this? Is this big enough? This font?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, good. So right here, you can see what PolyBase is doing. So it's going ahead and it's splitting up the load. It's taken, in this case, even though normally you don't use PolyBase, in this case, I was using PolyBase in order to create permanent tables on the database. So I had an external data source, and I created an external database on one of the servers in my cluster. And then I created a permanent table on that. So right here, you can see all the different, you can see multiple SPIDs here where PolyBase is going, reaching out to the external data source, grabbing the data, and then inserting it into a local table. Here, one of the PolyBase DMVs, the external work, you can see how it's breaking apart the work. So notice here in this column here, the compute node ID. So you can see here how it's splitting up the load, because if you peer through here, so like right here, here's the post table right here, here's the post table here. This one is being handled by 3, and this one's being handled by 1. So, and this is a larger query. Again, I was doing a select in order to pull data across. So you can see how SQL Server is taking this and it's splitting up the load as best it can. The reason I put this one in here is so you can see a little bit here where this one primarily is being done by the head node, but here you can see where this is actually shows the step of the query, but you can see here, so PolyBase is doing what it's supposed to do. It's creating a table in TempDB, and more importantly, it's cleaning itself up after itself. So here it did a query, dropped it, and then it created a new one. A few little things, errata about PolyBase is that it's limited on the compression algorithms. So especially if you're dealing with things in like Data Lake or Hadoop or something like that, it doesn't work with zip, but it will work with bzip, and gzip will work just fine too. So if you're dealing with a permanent situation where, so let's say that you have a lot of zip files. So let's say it's again a situation where you have like essentially like a cold storage sort of installation where not only is it offsite in a data lake, but then also you zipped up the files in order to save space. So you've taken this huge file. If you are planning to use PolyBase on a regular basis, I would take that file and I would split it into multiple files. I would zip them back up, gzip them, and then PolyBase would understand that it could grab from all the different files. It does do inserting when you're dealing with, again, more of kind of like the PolyBase version 1, so anything having to do with Hadoop, because blob storage is Hadoop. You know, that's what Microsoft used first in order to make blob storage. As I said before, right, and also you have to use SQL accounts in order for the connection to the external data source. That was back right here. So you have to create you do have to create a SQL Server account. So you can't use AD accounts yet with PolyBase. So that is another one of the definite limitations. Then the other point, again, patching, make sure that you're current on your patches. And if you had to use nvarchar max as a data type, it's not supported in the external tables. And we talked about, the idea of using it for archiving for data, archiving. So if you are keeping all your data, let's say your company has 30 years worth of business records, and you don't really need to keep all 30 years active at all times, because if you're a good DBA, you're ideally purging and archiving data. But maybe you want to be able to do some sort of report to show EBITDAs over 20, 30 years. So you keep your data in some sort of a cold, slow storage. Use PolyBase to have that permanent connection to the data. So if your report writers really want to do a query, or your data analysis people, they can just reach out and do it. And so the point is that you've already got this set up and it's ready to go, and they can do that query anytime they want to. Again, you can use PolyBase on your data warehouse, another really easy use there. Again, I go back to the idea that where you have companies where you have disparate data sources. One of the last job I was working at before I came to work for 3Cloud we were actively working on building a cloud in the sky. And what that involved was replication, which is a technology I'm very fond of. It's, again, another pain in the ass technology to get going, but once you get going right, it works really well. And so I set up replication to replicate data from multiple data sources. I think I had something like 12 or 13 different data sources, and I was using replication to put it all into one big data warehouse in the sky. And then the idea was that our report writers and our Power BI people could go through and they could just grab that data from there. It worked just fine. But I mean, really what I was doing, I was creating like a massive ETL. So in some cases, PolyBase might be a good option to that. And so instead, I might say, instead of having to actively have replication going, because replication, of course, is part of the problem of replication is that if you have to tear it down and bring it back up, it can be very time consuming. So instead, I would say at this point, that I would maybe use a SQL Server 2019 installation, which would have PolyBase running, and it would have external tables pointing to all these different data sources, and then I would point my report writer people to point to that SQL Server instance and go there from the data. You can see just different ways to use it. Yes, I've talked a lot. I like cats. So we hadn't worked on any of the connectors. It's on my list of things I want to do is that I want to go and set up. I've set up with Oracle, it works just fine. MongoDB is something I know nothing about, but I know that one of the ladies who was at my presentation at PASS asked me about that question. So I need to learn enough in order to set up a MongoDB data source. There's a lot of performance testing that I'm hoping to do. I'll be blogging about that. I just haven't got to it yet. And then finally, Synapse is different. As I mentioned here, the whole example about using Azure SQL DB. So that's actually wrong. So when I wrote this, I didn't understand that Azure SQL DB was actually using Elastic Query and not PolyBase. So that's that's a point. They're very similar technologies, but they're definitely not the same. And I suspect that Elastic Query is very single-threaded compared to PolyBase. The main thing is that it's exciting technology. I understand that once again, I keep on harping on it, but I showed you a demo about the scale-out nodes. But the main thing is that it really does allow you, it's relatively simple to just create your external data sources and create your external tables and then go right there. And the data is right there. A few references. So anyway, so thank you. Oh, and here's my address and my Twitter handle if you want.
So thank you, Michael. It's very informative.
You're welcome. I hope it was helpful. Very useful.
One thing that you mentioned and I didn't see in Bob Ward's book is the whole difference between link server being single-threaded and PowerBase being multi-threaded. That by itself, it's a huge difference.
It is a huge difference. And that one, I mean, you could just see that we're in the slide I was showing you where it showed you the activity. That would be a really good slide for me to create, is to show the single-threaded activity. I think I may add that on there. Thank you for that idea. I'm gonna do that.
Thank you for the presentation.
Sure. Well, hopefully I have the opportunity to come speak at your group again.